there, my name is Melissa and I am with the Row AI marketing team, and I am here with our founder and COO, Josh Browne. Hey Josh, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
So Josh, why don't you take a little bit of time and tell us a little bit more about Row AI and what your role is there?
Sure. I'm a co-founder of Row AI, and I would say on a day-to-day basis, I'm responsible for business development, more specifically managing the relationships of our bigger clients that we've had for several years, both in motorsports and in our growing climate space, in the climate space where we have a few projects. And then I also manage our Row Academics effort.
Great. So what sparked your interest in data science and software engineering?
Sure. So it's actually fairly accidental. I didn't necessarily have, I certainly don't have a formal background in software engineering. I would have historically considered myself more of a data engineer. But I was introduced to, I had an impromptu introduction in late 2012 by a group of people, mostly MIT PhDs that became my co-founders. They approached me to talk about building a predictive analytics tool to bet on professional auto racing. And that very quickly turned into a General Motors funded project that we still support to this day.
Cool. So you touched on motorsports a little. So that's a huge passion for a lot of people, particularly NASCAR. Were you always a race fan?
I actually have never been a race fan. I guess I could call myself one now, but I've never actually been a race fan. Again, accidentally, I got into professional auto racing through my first job out of school. I worked at Chrysler Corporation, and this was in the mid-90s. And the vice president of engineering at the time, his name was Francois Castang. He had come from Renault Formula One when Chrysler and Renault merged, I guess sometime in the 80s. And he wanted to use a motorsports platform to prove out a new way of doing product development using computer-aided engineering. And I got involved in that because I was part of the computer-aided engineering group at Chrysler, mostly because that group was made up of Carnegie Mellon graduates, and that's where I went to undergrad. So I had migrated to that group. And as a 20-something mechanical engineer working at a car company, when they said, you want to work on race cars, specifically European sports cars, seemed like a fun thing to spend my time doing.
Yeah. All right. We'll segue that into pit row and NASCAR. How does that?
So yeah. So my time at Chrysler I quickly pivoted to NASCAR because one of the drivers I worked with at Chrysler, his name is David Donahue, and his father was a famous sports car and IndyCar driver named Mark Donahue. And he raced for Roger Penske. So through the Chrysler project, I met Roger Penske and made the jump from Chrysler in Detroit to Penske racing in NASCAR land. And from there, spent the next part of 10 years or so in NASCAR, most of that time at, coincidentally, the Dodge factory-backed NASCAR team when they got back into racing. So my time at Chrysler was well spent, as I worked with the same people again. I just did it from the team side instead of the manufacturer side. So that's how I got into NASCAR racing. As far as race strategy goes, during my time in NASCAR, both at Evernham Motorsports, which was the Dodge team, and then later at Red Bull Racing, I worked with our affiliated Formula One teams. I was able to visit, and we did some collaboration at Red Bull with our Formula One team. But when I was with the Dodge team at Evernham, we had a collaboration with McLaren Mercedes, because Mercedes had owned Chrysler at the time, or was a part owner. So I got to see how Formula One teams did race strategy. I got to see how their predictive analytics worked, and how they use that to call the race and ultimately impact the outcome for their two cars. And it seemed like a problem that you could also solve in NASCAR. It's a bigger problem in NASCAR because unlike Formula One racing, it's a much longer race in NASCAR. Typically, you have more competitive cars. You have significant lap time fall off in some tracks. And you have full course cautions, really is the biggest difference between Formula One racing and NASCAR racing. You have full course cautions. So that those are, every time a caution comes out, that's a strategy inflection point. But I always thought you could do it in NASCAR. It would just be a much bigger data project. Never got around to doing it until 5+ years later when I met this group of smart people from MIT that wanted to do it. And the timing worked out that the level of computing necessary to do this kind of work had continued to evolve over that 5 to 10 year period since the first time I experienced it, so that we were actually able to do some of the work or some of the data science that we thought was possible, because we actually had the computing power to do it and do it quickly enough that it could impact a race in real time. I think a good, but you may mention it, or it may be at the tail end of this, of our chat, but last year we participated in a YouTube documentary series that Robert Downey Jr., I think he co-produced it, but he also he narrated our particular episode, where it's a really good, succinct example of how our pit row race strategy tool is used in NASCAR racing.
That's great. I'll make sure to include a link. I'm always impressed with that video.
Yeah, it's really well done. It's really well done. To hear Robert Jr. to say pit row sounds cool.
Right. So we talked about pit row. So why don't you tell me a little bit about the NASCAR playoffs that we're just entering into? I think we have one race under our belt so far. And why don't you tell us how the pit row strategy will influence the teams that are part of that?
Sure. I think right now five of our cars are in the playoffs. So the NASCAR playoff structure, it's a 10 race playoff. It starts with the top 16 teams from the regular season, or if you had won a race and you weren't in the top 16, but generally the top 16 cars. And every 3 races, they eliminate 4 of those cars. And then you get to the last race of the year. And while the entire field is still competing, there's a subset of 4 cars that are running for the championship. The playoff format has been going on for quite a while in NASCAR racing, probably 15 or 16 years, since 2004. But more recently, NASCAR implemented stage racing. So what that means is that not only do you score points based on the outcome of the race event, but there are inflection points throughout the event, stages. Usually there are 3 stages to a race. So you have the end of the first stage and the end of the second stage. The top 10 cars to finish that stage earn points that carry over to the end of the race, total cumulative points. So there are a lot of opportunities there. In most cases, there are strategic opportunities where you can take advantage of the stage, and there are risks and rewards to doing that, where you might do something that's otherwise non-intuitive to take advantage of stage points, but you have to be aware of what that risk may be further or later in the race. So what pit row does is it optimizes for overall points for the race event, taking into account those specific risks, and identifies when there are opportunities to be had, usually based on the predicted suboptimal behavior and decision making of your competitors. It's not always black and white. You have to make some estimates based on historical human behavior to figure out what you think the cars around you are going to do, to see if an opportunity might present itself.
Right. So they use gut, they use technology, and then they use good skills from the team.
Yes, and I'd say in the case of the pit row user cars, all of that is taken into account to provide you with a pretty robust recommendation based on everybody else's gut everyone else's experience and the performance of the cars around you. So if you want to try to outrun cars that might be faster than you, pit row looks for opportunities to do that.
Cool. All right. Well, I can't wait to watch the next race.
Yeah, it should be fun. The next race is Bristol, which is again, I said I'm not a race fan. However, the Bristol race at NASCAR is one of the best sporting events you could ever attend.
Cool. All right. Well, that's all we have time for today. We look forward to visiting again. And when we come back next time, we will hopefully dig into the academia world a little bit more.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Josh. And thanks, everybody. If you would like to find out more about Row AI, visit us at www.row.ai.